What's up, it's Marco, Sage of Soccer, and today I'm going to be talking about the MLS Superdraft. We had a lot of good players coming out of college and who will be entering the MLS. And despite it being rather overlooked, I think the MLS draft is still a good resource for a lot of players. At this World Cup, we had Tim Ream, who had a great performance. He came from St. Louis University. We had Matt Turner, who was a former college player, though he actually went undrafted. And even in terms of MLS prospects, we've got guys like Aidan Morris who spent some time in college. Though I'm not going to be counting homegrown players like Peter Stroud. That's going to be in a later video. But I think that it's still a valuable resource and we should be looking at it as fans of the national team. And this is going to be projecting players for the U.S. men's national team. I will be talking a little bit about some international players, but if you want to look at just the MLS side of things, Draft Utopia is linked in the description. They should be putting out their draft recap really soon, and let's get into it. The main thing we have to look at for prospects coming out of college is their technical ability, because we need them to have that on-ball ability, that technical baseline needed to be a great player, and that's really not a given from college players. We've even seen that at the highest level with the U.S. men's national team. Guys like Aaron Long and Christian Roldan, who despite their athletic talents, really didn't have the technical ability needed to impact the game at that high level. So when you're looking at these players coming out of college, the main guys I want to look at are players who are really good with the ball at their feet, and I've looked at a lot of film, and there are some guys who I feel like are at that level and might be able to impact us and have that success. First player I'm going to talk about is Duncan McGuire, drafted by Orlando City. He's a striker from Creighton, and he's a very good player. He's somebody who I've been really high on. He was the top scorer in the NCAA. For him getting playing time this year, he'll have to battle with Jack Lynn for a backup spot in Orlando, and I think he has a good chance of doing that. And Orlando won the Open Cup. They should be playing a lot of games this year. I think Duncan McGuire will get some time. And with McGuire, I really like him for a lot of reasons. The obvious goal-scoring ability is there. He can score with both of his feet and with his head as well. On top of that, really good at his hold-up play. He's good in the air. He's not like a huge player, but he's physical enough. He's good in the air. He can bring down balls. He can combine well. I mentioned that technical ability. He's got it. He can combine with his players really well, and he's a guy I'm pretty high on. On top of that, pretty good athlete. I've seen a lot of Jordan Morris comparisons, and I think that's a good one. Jordan Morris, we have to remember, he had a ton of potential. He just injuries took his toll. He didn't leave his comfort zone, but he reminds me of a young Jordan Morris, and that's a really good thing. Just a pretty good athlete, making good runs into channels. And on top of that, he can do a backflip after he scores. He's a good athlete, and I think he's a really good player. He can press a lot when asked to, and the only thing is, I don't think he's that creative of a player, more of in the box, number 9, good hold-up play. But I think he could be a very good player for Orlando at this next level. Next is the youngest player in the draft, CJ Fodrey, drafted by Austin, and he's out of San Diego State University, and he looks like a really good player. He's a attacker who I won't necessarily say what he's going to be. He could play a wing. He could also be a striker. He's 6'2". He's big enough to play that striker role. I actually really like him in combination. He's got a good one-touch, very good at combining. As a really young player, he's probably not going to be as physical as somebody like McGuire up top yet, but I think that he does have the potential to get to that point. I think his grandfather was an offensive lineman, so he can definitely put on muscle. And an NFL offensive lineman, I should say. On top of that, I think the biggest thing that's good about him is he's a left-footed player, and that we lack a lot of left-footed attackers in this program. And just having somebody with that talent is going to be crucial. He's going to Austin, and it's going to be a bit tough for him to break into the team, especially as a really young player. We've seen Wolf get into the squad, but Fodrey's not the coach's son, and I'm not sure if he has Wolf's talent level as well. But I think he could be a very good player. He's a great athlete, really fast, good finisher, and like I mentioned before, he has that technical baseline needed to get into the highest level, and I honestly wouldn't be opposed to getting him into a U20 or U19 camp, especially if Kevin Paradis is unavailable, if he's having success with Wolfsburg, which I'm hoping for. And I think that he could be a really talented player, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do at Austin. Then we have Joey Akpunonu, a center back, going to Cincinnati. He's out of Bowling Green, and he's looking like a pretty good player. I hadn't heard too much about him, but when he was named to the MLS Showcase roster, I looked up his film, and he looks really impressive as a center back. And in addition, Cincinnati's losing a few center backs. Cameron's moving on, Tyler Blackett is as well, and he could see some time like Ian Murphy did last year. Joey Akpunonu, he is a beast in the air. Like, he was his team's leading goal scorer. He took their penalties for them, but he had a lot of headers in, and he was taking penalties for a team as a center back. He is really good on the ball. Like, the guy who's talented at playing out the back under pressure. Like, he's somebody who I think could be really good. Both of his feet are good. I'm glad he took the penalties, because I did not know which was his preferred foot until I saw those penalties, because his left is really good as well. He can play on both sides of a back line. He's 6'3". He's big enough to play center back and a back two. Good athlete, like pretty fast and pretty strong on the ball as well. He's obviously going to have to add some strength as he goes up against just fully grown players, but that will come in my opinion. And I think that he looks like a really good prospect. He does still have some room to grow as a center back, obviously, but I think his technical ability is really good, and he has the tools needed to be a great center back, and that's what we're kind of looking for, the tools needed to reach that next level, and he has all of them. Xavier Zengue is a player who's going to Columbus. He's out of Dayton. He's a defender. He's been playing center back. I could also see him playing right back. He's another guy who's really good on the ball, very athletic. I think he could become a right back. He's 6 foot tall, so he does have that option available. Maybe he's in a back three as a center back. But he's just somebody who I think looks like a pretty good player. Like, again, he's somebody who has the tools needed to reach that next level. I'm not as high on him as Akpunonu, but I think he could be a very good player, and he is somebody to take a look at. And he's actually the last first-round pick of an American that I'm going to be talking about in this section. M.D. Myers is a striker drafted by NYCFC. He's out of Rutgers University, and he spent some time at the Philadelphia Union Academy. And I was kind of hoping that the Philadelphia Union would grab him, but hey, NYCFC has a good striker. There's actually not too much competition there for a backup, so he might get a chance despite being a third-round pick. And Myers is just a great finisher with some good hold-up play. He's got a good first touch. Needed to have that that technical ability. Like, I think he has that. He in the box, good left foot, good first touch. I liked his pressing ability. He's like kind of like noticeably brave, like willing to put his body on the line. Like, I think he could be a very good player. He's not like an elite athlete, but he has that technical ability. He's a really good goal scorer, good hold-up play, and I think he has some possibility for success. The last player I'm going to be talking about in this section is Aidan Rocha. DC United drafted him. He's from Georgetown University, and he's a bit of a tough player to talk about because I don't really know what position he's going to play. He was a right back for a lot of his career, but he shifted to a midfield role, and he really did well there. It coincided with Georgetown having a lot of success. And as a player, he's really good technically. He has that ability. He's probably the only midfielder I'm going to be talking about who has that good technical ability. In addition, as a right back, he has a good cross. The issue is he's not that great of an athlete. He probably wouldn't have been taken as a right back, and given DC traded for Luan, I don't think he's going to be played there, though he was taken as a third-round pick, so he might not even make the team to begin with. But he's somebody who I think is worth taking a chance on. He has that technical ability in midfield. He can pick out a pass, and he might still have some good defensive abilities from his time at right back. I think he's somebody who does have some potential and somebody to keep an eye on at DC. That's it for the players who I think are those really technical guys who have that ball skill needed to reach the next level. But it should be said that haven't stopped players like Aaron Long and Christian Roldan from reaching the national team, so I don't think you should give up on everybody who I didn't mention here. But there are some good players as well, and college is notable for bringing forward some good goalkeepers. So I want to talk about basically all the American goalkeepers taken. And the first one is Cole Jensen, drafted by Miami, and he's out of Xavier University. There are a lot of good goalkeepers at Miami. Drake Callender is probably going to be their starter. I actually really like their backup, CJ Dos Santos, so I'm not sure if he ends up getting a lot of time. He's a guy who I mentioned in the College Showcase video where Xavier doesn't really post any film of their games, and I wasn't seeing him much live because they're behind a paywall. So I don't really know too much about him. And if you notice in the actual draft when they were talking about him, they didn't mention his skills at all. But he's 6'5", he's got a huge frame, and he's been given All-American honors. He's arguably the top shot stopper in the nation. And in addition, this is his first year playing. Like, he did all of this without much experience, and that, to me, seems like he could be on the rise. I don't think he's great with his feet. I couldn't find much film on him. Like, literally, the film on him is from highlights that other schools posted of their players. Like, come on, Xavier, step it up. You've got some good players there. And I think that he could be a talented player. I'm not sure if he plays much at Miami, but somebody to keep an eye on. Next is Elian Haddock, goalkeeper going to New York Red Bull. He's out of Yale, and he could easily become the backup at New York Red Bull and win some playing time in the Cup. He's a 6'4" goalkeeper, solid shot stopper, good in the air at controlling his box. His feet leaves a little bit something to be desired, but another just good shot stopper, always valuable to have. And he does have a decent chance to get some playing time, especially in the Open Cup. So someone to keep an eye on. Don't think he's like a huge prospect, but looks pretty good. And obviously Matt Turner wasn't a huge prospect when he came out of college. Next, we got a Holden Trent out of, he's going to Philadelphia. My Philadelphia Union actually drafted somebody. He's out of High Point, and he's going to be behind Andre Blake and Matt Freese. We recently re-signed John Bendick as well. And honestly, I kind of like Brooks Thompson as our Union 2 goalkeeper. So I don't know if he's even our 5th choice right now. And Freese is going to get a lot of MLS Next Pro minutes. But that being said, I think he was the goalkeeper I was highest on coming into the draft because I think that he has a lot of potential. He's 6'2". He shows a lot of athleticism and good reaction time. He's decent at controlling his box. I do think he needs to develop a bit more in that category. And he isn't great with his feet, but I think he's still a pretty good prospect. And Philadelphia has shown an ability to develop goalkeepers even when they're not playing. John McCarthy, unfortunately, and Matt Freese have shown that. So it's not a bad place to fall, but I just don't really understand this pick, especially being the Philadelphia Union who don't draft anybody. But we did draft Andre Blake, so maybe we see something there. Then we have Ryen Bilichuk, drafted by Portland. He's out of Elon University. And this is a pick that I like for the wrong reasons. I mean, he's a 6'3" goalkeeper, a decent shot stopper, but I didn't really like him too much beyond that. He seems like he could be a good player. But the main reason I like this pick is Portland have a goalkeeper who's a really young guy in MLS Next Pro, Hunter Solte. And if they're drafting a young goalkeeper when they really don't need to, maybe that's a sign that Solte moves into the first team and gets a lot more time with the first team in Portland this year. I'm a big fan of Hunter, and I think that this pick might show it. So I like this pick for the wrong reasons. Then we have Russell Shealy. He's going to LA Galaxy. He's out of Syracuse, where he won that national title. He's probably behind Bond and Klinsmann, maybe even a couple more guys than Los Dos. But I do like him as goalkeeper. He's got some good positioning, some decent reactions. He can come out of his box. I don't think he's like perfect at controlling it. He's not great with his feet, though he was better than I thought he would be in the College Cup. And I think it could be a solid player and somebody to keep an eye out for, especially in if you're going to be watching Los Dos. Are they still in the USL, or did they move to MLS Next Pro? I'm going to have to double check that. And last goalkeeper I want to talk about is Hunter Morse. He's going to Cincinnati out of Western Michigan. And being behind Roman Celentano isn't a great sign, but with Beckham Sunderland leaving, there is probably an opening in MLS Next Pro with their second team. And I actually really liked Hunter Morse's film. He's a 6'3" goalkeeper, pretty solid shot stopper, and very good in the air, and he was pretty good with his distribution. I think he's at that level where you really like your distribution to be, and he's easily the most well-rounded goalkeeper in this draft. Cincinnati, they seem to be good at scouting goalkeepers, and while he probably won't play much, I'm expecting him to develop, and I think he has a good bit of potential. He's part of a really good Western Michigan defense. I'll actually be talking about it a little bit more later, but I'm a big fan of Hunter Morse. I think he could be a sleeper pick in this draft. That's it for goalkeepers, and before I get into the international guys, I want to talk about some interesting players who are eligible for the U.S. men's national team. These guys aren't at that technical level that I really like, but I think they're worth talking about. The first is Joey Skinner. He's drafted by Nashville. He's out of Clemson. He just transferred in from UNC Greensboro, so he actually wasn't part of that national title team. He's going to be behind Daniel Lovitz at Nashville. And the main thing I like about him, left back, left-footed player, which is something you have to take note of. I personally thought he was looking really good defensively, and he might be an option to play center back. He's a 6'2" left back, so that is an option. But the commentators at the draft seem to think the opposite, that his defensibility was kind of like shaky, and he was really good going forward. Now, he wasn't that great this year. He only had, I think, 2 goals and an assist for Clemson, but in his previous season at UNC Greensboro, he was really good. He had, I think it was 4 goals, 7 assists, so he has that attacking potential in him, and I seem to think that he's a good defender, so... And if he's as good going forward as commentators were talking about, and I think there was a Kerr on there who watches a lot of college soccer. Like, I just watched film on him individually, so maybe seen a lot more games of Skinner. So I think he's definitely an interesting prospect. I'm not too high on him, but I think he's somebody we have to take note of. Next, we got Patrick Agyemang, who's going to Charlotte. He's out of Rhode Island University. He probably won't be a starter, but I could expect him to be in the first team. And this guy's just a huge physical presence. Like, just a beast physically. I think he's 6'4", strong. He moves really well for a big man, and I think he's got some good dribbling ability. His technical ability just isn't at that great level that you like to see, but just a 6'4" strong player could be kind of game-breaking. And last guy is Landon Aghido. He's going to Cincinnati. I didn't bother getting film out of him because he's out of Air Force, and he probably will be doing service time. But if he does play, I have heard some good things about him, so I just wanted to mention that. Now onto the international players. I don't want to talk about them too much because this is more about gauging players' potential for the highest level. But I think we have a couple of good guys who will be fixtures in the MLS for years to come and who could honestly raise the level of quality in the league. And doing that will only make the players coming through even better. So Diop, the number 1 pick, going to Charlotte out of Clemson. Charlotte with another number 1 pick. They hit it out of the park with Ben Bender last year. So definitely a good sign there. Left-footed center back, which is always crucial. Like, I was kind of digging into him like, oh, he's from Montverde Academy. Is there any chance that he could be eligible for the national team? But I really don't think he is. But very good on the ball, especially for an MLS level. Solid defensively, good athlete. Similar to those center backs I was mentioning earlier, just has all the traits needed to be a successful player. And I honestly could expect him to get a lot of playing time for Charlotte this year. They definitely wanted him. They traded into this pick, and I think he'd be a very promising player. Next, we got Shaq Muhammad going to Orlando. He's from Duke, and he's probably going to get some time. He's not going to interfere with Duncan McGuire's playing time, despite being an attacking player. He's more of a wing or an attacking midfielder. I think that he's probably best at a 10, but it's kind of tough to be playing as a 10. Like, a lot of teams don't play with that. And I could expect him to be kind of a wing. I think I'd compare him to Paul Arriola, where he's has a lot of good attributes at this level. I'm not sure how they translate to the highest one, but for this, good goal scorer, good enough speed, pretty good technically. Now, I wouldn't say all of that translates to playing in the Premier League, but I think he'd be a very good player for Orlando and add a lot of quality for a team that needs to just have that consistency. Then we have Balma, who's going to New England. He's out of Maryland, and this guy, I think he's a bit of a project, but he's got a ton of speed. I saw some comparisons to Tejan Buchanan, so New England taking him has to be a good sign. He's another guy who's a bit of an attacking midfielder, could play out wide. He has had a lot of good goal contributions in the past. Didn't have the seasons that he probably would have liked to out of Maryland this year, but I think he could be a very promising player, and just with the speed that he has, you have to take note of it. And then we have JC Ngandu, who's going to Vancouver out of UNC Greensboro. He's actually one of the oldest players in the draft, despite being a Generation Adidas guy. He came over kind of late in his academy career, but I think he could help them out. I don't think he has the highest ceiling given his age, but he could be able to compete immediately. He probably has some versatility given that they took him. He was more of an attacking midfielder, but I'm actually a big fan of Ryan Gold. Even when he was in Scotland and Portugal, I was liking him, so I don't think they're going to be taking him to play that position, but he could be a bit of a jack-of-all-trades guy who comes in and really helps the team. Then we have Burton Jackason going to Real Salt Lake. He's out of Pittsburgh University, and he's a dynamic attacker who could probably play multiple positions. Very good attacking threat who I think has some speed. He could be very good off the bench, and I think when you're an attacker who's very versatile, you have a lot of options to play, and he could see a lot of time in MLS Next Pro. But I think he does get a chance with RSL. They had a good pick from Pitt last year, and I think they could be double dipping. And then we have Valentin Noel, his teammate, who's going to Austin. Noel's another really good player, just a great striker, who I'm hoping does play striker and doesn't impact Fodrey's playing time much. But I think he could be a really top prospect, and especially in the MLS, I think he'd be there for years to come. He looks like a really good player. Next, on to Canada. We had a lot of Canadian players drafted this year. I think the top one is Moise Bombito. He's going to Colorado. He's out of New Hampshire University. And he does have a decent chance to play. I think Colorado played with a good amount of center backs, and I don't think they ever really replaced Austin Trusty. And Moise is very good with both of his feet. He's a righty naturally, but he is good with both of them. And I think there's a decent chance he could play there, especially given that they took an international player. I think they are pretty high on him. And I think Bambito looks like a really good player, similar to what I mentioned with Diop, just good on the ball. He has that technical ability. He's a very fast player as well. He's got a lot of recovery speed, and he's huge. He's like 6'4", and I think he has all the traits needed to be a really good center back. And honestly, if I'm a Canadian fan, I'm getting pretty excited because Canada has a huge issue with center backs. I think really cost them at the World Cup, and going into the tournament, I think I said they had a bottom 5 center back group in the entire tournament talent-wise, and I think that showed. And just having an option to just be in a bit of an upgrade, because I think he could be better than a Kamal Miller. I think he'd be better than a Victoria, a Henry. So I think he looks like a really good prospect. If I'm Canadian, I'm excited about him. Then we have Steven Afria going to Sporting Kansas City out of Florida International. And he's just a really fast striker who looks like a good finisher. I think he's a bit one-dimensional, kind of like a Toussaint Ricketts a few years ago for Canada. He could get some time off the bench for Sporting, but I think when you have speed and you're a good finisher, that's a valuable trait. And technical ability matters a bit less when you're a striker, especially one who's going to be coming off the bench. And I think he could have a pretty good impact for Sporting and someone to keep an eye on. Then we have Malcolm Johnston going to NYCFC. He's out of Maryland. He's Alistair Johnston's little brother, Alistair Johnston, who recently got that move to Celtic and is a starter for the Canadian national team. NYCFC do need midfield depth, so I do see a chance for him to play a good amount. He's a really talented athlete. He's a pretty versatile player as well, so I'm expecting him to get a good bit of time. Then we have Levante Johnson out of Syracuse, part of that national championship winning team. I think Nathan Opoku, his teammate, is going to be testing the waters in Europe. That's why he was not given a Generation Adidas contract. I haven't confirmed that, but that's just what I've heard. And he's going to Vancouver as a domestic player, and I think he does have a decent chance. Vancouver is not exactly known for giving young players that many chances, aside from Alphonso Davies, but forwards tend to get a good bit of playing time, and as a domestic player in Canada, I think he has a decent chance. Especially in MLS Next Pro, I think he'll be a decent player. And last Canadian guy I want to talk about, he's also going to Vancouver. The other guy from Western Michigan I mentioned earlier, Daniel Nimick. And it will be a bit tough to play in Vancouver. They have Campagna there, who I think a lot of Canadian fans would like to see get some playing time. But Vancouver does lack center back depth. And Nimick, he's a pretty big aerial threat, looks really good on set pieces. He's part of a really good defense with Western Michigan, as mentioned with Hunter Morse. And like Morse, he's very good on the ball. He's picking out passes. He does well even when pressured. And it really shows he's actually dual national, but with England. So I think if he gets a chance, he's going to be joining Canada. He's out of Leeds Academy. He played with Leeds United before transferring to Harrogate. And I think he looks like a really talented player. I think that Nimick could be another sleeper out of Western Michigan this draft. There was a really good Western Michigan team. They won the last MAC championship. I'm really hoping they get moved to a pretty good conference as well, because their soccer team's been on the rise. And before I go, I want to talk about the rest of the American prospects taken in the first round. And these guys, I'm not sure how good they'll be on a national team level, but I think that they could be a very good MLS guys, and I think they're worth talking about. First guy is Elijah Paul out of Real Salt Lake. He actually played there at Real Salt Lake, and he's being drafted there. He's not a homegrown. He didn't spend enough time there. He's from Washington University, and I think he's another guy who could get some time off the bench. I mentioned with Jack Hassan, when you're an attacker who's versatile, you have a good chance of playing. I don't really know what his position is going to be. He's got some good speed. He's not elite speed, but some good speed. Very good finisher as well. Finds a really good positioning. I think that's his best attribute. Finds himself in the right place a lot. I'm not sure where he plays. I don't think he has the hold-up play needed to be a good striker, but they could develop that. He spent a lot of time in MLS Next Pro. I think he has some good creativity as well. I think he ends up playing a winger, but I think he looks like a pretty decent option for Real Salt Lake. Next is Owen O'Malley, the first ever draft pick by St. Louis City SC. He's out of Creighton, like Duncan McGuire. I actually said in my College Cup video that I thought he was a good player, but he's not going to get a Generation Adidas contract or anything. But, well, he proved me wrong, I guess. It's a bit tough to predict how St. Louis City FC will play because they haven't played yet. I think O'Malley could be either a winger or a right back. He was playing a bit like, he was like a left wing back by name when he was playing with Creighton, but that would turn into like a bit of like a inverted winger. They're playing like a 3-4-3, and their wingers would kind of like tuck into being like attacking mids, and their wing backs would be their main wingers. Like, it's tough to say, and he is right-footed despite playing left wing back. And I don't think he has that great technical ability that you like to see, but he's technical in like a Will Trapp kind of way. Like, he's got a good first touch, and he can make some good passes. He just doesn't really have the speed of play that I think I'd like to see. As a player, he's a pretty good goal scorer. He's got some good size that translates well to defending. And he's not really a defender, but he can have some good moments, and he's a really good dribbler. He's got some pretty good speed as well. And it might be a bit of a project, but I think he could develop into a pretty nice defender, especially as a right back. Like, I think that's something to keep an eye on. I think that's it for the Generation Adidas prospects. Some other guys to talk about are Daniel Mooney, who's going to San Jose out of Indiana. He's one of the top defenders in the nation this year, and I think he could find some time. He might be a right back. I'm kind of hoping that if there is room at center back, Casey Walls will get some playing time. But I think he's good on the ball at an MLS level. Maybe not an international level, but on an MLS level for sure. And pretty solid defensively. We'll have to see where he ends up playing. It's a bit tough to predict. Similarly, we've got Abdi Salim, who's going to Orlando out of Syracuse. And they have a lot of depth at center back, including Thomas Williams, who I'm hoping would play over Salim. But he is a left-footed player, according to the commentary for the draft. I actually didn't see that when I was watching him. I think he was playing a right center back, but that might just show that he's good with both feet. And he seems more of a no-nonsense defender, and he's got the height need to play center back. But there might be a bit of left-back potential. Orlando doesn't have too much depth there, so if he does play left-back, that is something to keep an eye on. And he was part of that national championship-winning Syracuse team. He is a good defender. And I think he came there from Buffalo State. Like, they really good, just able to jump up in levels. So maybe something to keep an eye on. Then we have Herbert Endley. He's going to Dallas out of Indiana. And hard to see him playing too much. Dallas, they push through a lot of homegrown players. And they already have a pretty good lineup, especially for an MLS level, like with Hayes Ferreira, Paul Arriola. Paxton Pomacall might play wing as well. Like, it's going to be tough to get some playing time. He might end up at North Texas. But he's a pretty good athlete, and he became a big part of that Indiana team who had a really good run. And despite not being great technically, he might be able to find a role, especially as a winger. Then last first-round pick I want to talk about is Emeka Eneli, who's going to Real Salt Lake. Another attacker going to Real Salt Lake. He's out of Cornell. I think he's got as good of a chance to play as the other attackers. He's more of a high-energy guy. He has a bit of creativity to him as well. Decent goal-scoring threat, but I think he's more of just a high-energy guy who can probably help out their next pro team, but he might be able to make an impact. We'll have to see. And some other guys from later in the draft. John Klein went to St. Louis City SC out of St. Louis. He was part of that really good St. Louis team last year, who I mentioned it was just really unfortunate that the St. Louis City SC came into the MLS just 1 year too late, because they could have gotten like Isaiah Parker, Kip Keller, Simon Betcher. Like, there were a lot of really good, Patrick Schulte. There were a lot of really good players last year, but they got John Klein in the end. Then we have Isaiah Reed. He was the player of the tournament in Clemson's national championship winning side. And I think he could be an interesting player if he transitions to left back. That's something to keep an eye on. Then we had like a Ryan Wintenbrink, who also goes to Dallas with his Indiana teammate Endley. I don't think he has too much of a chance to play, but he was really good with Indiana, so I want to mention him. And Milo Gavarian, who's going to Montreal. He's a left back, and I'm talking about left backs a lot because we kind of need them for a national team. And he is an American player who was taken by a Canadian team, so they might see something there. And Montreal's been putting through a lot of pretty good players. We have Georgi Mihalovic. I think they had Kone. Like, I'm thinking there might be something there. So I wanted to mention Milo. And two last players I want to talk about are guys who weren't necessarily college players, but they were still taken in the draft. Maximilian Arfstein. He's from San Jose's second team, but he was taken by Columbus Crew. He was from UC Davis before that, and there are some complicated rules and MLS stuff. But he's a right winger who likes to cut it on his left foot. He's actually got a pretty good right despite that, but he has some pretty decent speed. And just being a left-footed attacker, I think that's something to take note of. But I'm not expecting him to play too much, but he did have a really good season in MLS Next Pro, and he was taken for a reason. And as a left-footed player, he is somebody to keep an eye on. And lastly is probably the best American player I've talked about since the very beginning, is Ryen Jiba. Was taken by Minnesota. He's out of Union, Omaha. He spent some time at Salt Lake Community College, though he has no connection to Real Salt Lake. Should mention that Arfstein spent some time at UC Davis. But with Jiba, he is drafted by Minnesota because when Minnesota was upset by Omaha in the U.S. Open Cup, he really impressed that Minnesota staff. And as a left-footed player, they wanted to take a chance on him, and they used their draft pick there. And there isn't too much highlights of him. He was at a community college, so there isn't much film there. But from what I can tell, he's a good athlete. He's got a pretty good cross on him. And I've seen a couple of good moments with his technical ability where he's playing these 1-2s pretty well. I haven't seen enough to really be sure about it, but I would keep an eye on Ryen Jiba this year at Minnesota because I think he might be a decent player. And that's all the prospects I want to talk about from the MLS draft. I think we have a couple of pretty good players. I'm really high on Duncan McGuire and CJ Fodrey especially. And I think there might be a couple of players who could impact the national team. Maybe that'll just be at a Camp Cupcake in a few years' time. Or maybe they could be good strikers for us at the 2026 World Cup. Who knows? And I think we shouldn't give up on just looking at college players. Because on top of just actually putting through some good players like a Tim Ream, like a Matt Turner, I think it's very good that the MLS has college to begin with. Because if you look at the academy system in England, which obviously that academy system's better. I think one of the best players I'm talking about is a Leeds reject. But when you're a player who gets released from there, a lot of times that's it. Your career's done and it's over. And here, if you're not good enough, you get an education. You get another chance. You get to find some late bloomers here. And I think it's really good that we have that as just a soccer community, that we have that fallback option. So I'm really excited about a couple of these players, but I think it's good that we have college soccer there just to begin with, just on a more human level. And hey, we might get some good players out of it after all. And yeah, that's all I've talked about. See ya.